Greetings and welcome to Totality Town. One of the questions that a lot of people have is, what about eclipses at other places in the solar system? Do other planets have solar eclipses? The answer is yes, they do, but not like on Earth. Earth is the only location in the solar system that has perfect total solar eclipses. Everywhere else in the solar system is either going to have their own version of an annular eclipse, or the moon will be so close to the would-be observer that it completely blocks the sun and a good chunk of its corona, so it's really more of an occultation than it is an eclipse. Let's go ahead and we're going to take a look at some eclipses on other planets in the solar system. One of the most notable is eclipses on Mars. Mars has two different moons. Phobos is the large one, Deimos is the small one. Both of them orbit the planet very rapidly, and so eclipses happen on Mars several times a day. However, these would be annular eclipses because the objects are so small. If you're standing on the surface of Mars, the sun would appear to be about 19 arc minutes across, whereas Phobos would be less than 8 and Deimos would be less than 2. So these would be annular eclipses where very little of the sun is going to be blocked. As we can see here, Phobos only blocks a small portion of the sun, and Deimos blocks even less. By the way, both of these animations are courtesy of the Curiosity rover on Mars. Thank you, NASA. Although eclipses on Mars are fun, what is really the most impressive and anyone can see with a telescope are eclipses, quote unquote, on Jupiter. Now for Jupiter, there are a couple of different things that can happen, but just know ahead of time that all of these can only be seen with a telescope. One of the really fun things about looking at Jupiter through a telescope is watching its moons dance around the planet over the course of time. You can see dramatic changes in the position of the moons from one night to the next, and if you're looking at the closest moon, Io, those changes can happen in a few hours. If you look at just the right time, there are 4 different kinds of events which you might catch Jupiter's moons doing. In astronomy, whenever a small object passes in front of a larger object, it's known as a transit, and Jupiter's moons do this all the time. You can see it happening right here. There are also what are known as shadow transits, when the moon's shadow is cast onto the planet's disk. These aren't known as eclipses for reasons that you'll see in just a minute. As the moon continues in its orbit, you're also able to witness 2 different kinds of disappearances. An occultation, or when the moon is occulted, this occurs when the moon passes behind the planet and is completely blocked from our view. The final type of event is an eclipse. Jupiter casts its shadow into space just like Earth does. When a moon enters Jupiter's shadow, it will suddenly disappear from view. Depending on where Jupiter and Earth are in their orbits, the moon can also reappear seemingly out of nowhere as it exits Jupiter's shadow. The other reason to get a little bit more excited about eclipses or occultations or shadow transits of Jupiter is that it's the time of year when Jupiter is approaching opposition. That means it's at its closest point to Earth and will be more easily able to see any of these events as the moons pass in front of or behind the king of the planets. To know when the next event around Jupiter is going to happen, check your planetarium software, such as the Sky Safari app. There will be a list of all the different events, whether it's an occultation, a transit, a shadow transit, or an actual eclipse, that'll be happening in the next period of time. You can also find such lists at Sky and Telescope or any number of other resources online. Simply do a search for Jupiter events. Seeing a shadow transit through a telescope is an especially enjoyable event. Here's an example of one that I caught in the summer of 2020, where you can see the shadow of Io cast perfectly on the planet's disk. Every now and then, the orbits will align so that 2 of Jupiter's moons will cast their shadows on the planet at the same time. This doesn't happen very often, though. Even more rare, This is a unicorn, is when you have a triple shadow transit and 3 moons cast their shadow on the surface of the disk. So you might say, well, that's Mars and Jupiter, but what about the other planets? Well, remember that Mercury and Venus don't have moons, so they're off the table right away. As far as Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune go, they have lots of moons. However, the balance of the size of the moon to the size of the sun and the distance between the planet and the moon just isn't right for solar eclipses there. They'll be even more annular, or should we say smaller annular, than what we saw on Mars. Yes, there are places where in theory you could hang out at just the right location in space to catch a moon's shadow at the right way that it would be the equivalent of a total solar eclipse on Earth, but there are no surfaces where you can stand other than Earth in our solar system that'll give you a total solar eclipse. If you enjoyed this video, please support the channel by subscribing so you can be notified of the next episode. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again next time here on Totality Town.